call the front block is the block closest here, close to the road. This acre immediately in front of us was planted in April of 2006. If any of you have seen the TV show, the very first episode where we're planting vines, this is what you're seeing right here. Is this last acre of grapes. The first 2 acres of vines that we're planting are right down here. We did an acre of Cabernet Franc and an acre of Vineyard, some of which you all, I believe, contributed to. Thank you very much for drinking your stuff. It worked out.
Can we go see those plants?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got them all marked, so you can walk through and pick out your name. Really. And then,
which wine do you get out of an acre?
Good question. We get that a lot. Each acre will produce, and that depends on yield, okay, and it depends on density. But at our yield, or at our density, like I said, we're about 960 vines per acre, so 9 feet by 5 feet. 12 400-foot rows is 960 vines. We bring in about 4.5 tons per acre, and that's about 250 cases of wine per acre. So there's enough fruit out here to yield about 1,500 cases of wine. We've got 4 other growers that produce fruit from us. So Loudoun's got 28 wineries, but there's another 30 vineyards on top of that, of people that are just growing fruit, whether they're retirees, farmers, people that still have day jobs and are looking for something to do with their land. It's very typical in Loudoun, kind of like in a lot of other areas. You get a personal property real estate doing something agricultural with the land. So that is an incentive, particularly with housing prices. Loudoun County for 3 years in a row was the wealthiest county in the country. So, I mean, personal property taxes are ridiculous on some of this property. So that's why people are starting to engage not just in grape growing, but little pick-your-own berry farms. You know, some artisanal cheese places popping up, any kind of agricultural pursuit. You see a lot of alpacas and llamas. We've got llamas across the street. You'll see sheep. If you see the long-haired cattle as you come in off of Route 9 on that field, those are actually called yaddle. They're a crossbreed of yak and cattle. Very, very, very prized beef. The entire block behind us, this was all planted in 2009, and this will actually be our first harvest of any of this fruit. It takes 3 years to grow a vine and train a vine to the point where it is actually producing a usable yield. So this is an acre of Sauvignon Blanc behind us, and then you can see the red cape on the tip of the trellis down there. That's where the Petit Verdot starts. And beyond that is only the second commercial planting of an Austrian grape called Blaufränkisch. And we'll be, like I said, only the second folks in Virginia doing that. That grape does very well in Hungary. And so a lot of people, as the Virginia wine industry evolves, we're trying to figure out how we can start to get some of these very unique varietals and really create, a regional identity. About 6 weeks ago, the Virginia Wine Marketing Board actually named Vineyard as Virginia's grape. So if you hear of Oregon Pinot Noirs, New York Rieslings, California Cabernet Sauvignons, they will now speak of Virginia Vineyard. And when we were planning this, we did a lot of research and talked to a lot of people, and people knew back then that Vineyard does very well in Virginia. So 2 of our 6 acres are dedicated to Vineyard, and we do it in 2 styles, and that has proven, to be one of the decisions that we made that went right. And that's probably the only one, but whatever, we'll take it. So what we'll do is we'll walk into the vines a little bit, and what it's interesting to note, and we can start while we're all standing here, these trellis configurations. So you can actually see this, we have a very heavy wire right here. This is called the cordon wire. And you can see
right here, son.
On the rows, that is really where all of the fruit hangs. And if you look at the structure of the vine, you can see we've either got 2 or 1 trees that have grown up, and then we bend them sideways, and they grow laterally along the cordon. And that is where you get to what we call our fruiting zone. And then you can see all of the leaf material down here. We actually go through twice a year by hand. And we'll come in here and we want to open up the fruiting zone. So we go through and we pull away the leaves so that fruit is hanging nice and unencumbered. It's a very labor-intensive process, but an operation our size is not big enough to warrant using mechanized machines to do all of that. So it's all done by hand. All of the vines are also hedged by hand. You can see how the vines have kind of started to grow up over the top of the catch wires. Well, we have to make sure that the sun can get in there and shine in that fruiting zone to dry out the fruit, to make sure we're not getting molds and mildews and all of that stuff. So again, we just use loppers like you would do a boxwood hedge, and we go up and down the rows all by hand. And that's done either 2 or 3 times a year. These
Can I see your back muscles?
Oh, dude. Those are long days because it's 102 out here, you know?
Called you dude.
I am a dude.
A lot of these processes are very time sensitive. You got to make sure that everything is happening at certain times during the year. And then, so we'll kind of step back a couple of months. The vineyard season really starts in March. So all of this growth that you see, all of this green stuff, obviously the leaves will drop in the fall, but every March all of these canes are all pruned away, the whole way down to nothing. If you all want to step down here, I can kind of give you a visual on exactly what the pruning situation is. So like I said, this is a 3-year-old vine. And if you look here, like I said, this is called the cordon. And what we do is called a cordon spur pruning. So you see this little spur right here? In March, this is all that was left of this vine. All of this growth that you see has happened since the 3rd week of April. That's how vigorous these vines are. And it's really interesting. You can come out here before we do our first hedging. These vines can actually be touching in the middle. They almost like make tunnels. It's very creepy at night, actually. I've often thought how cool it would be to film like a horror movie out in a vineyard at night. I mean, you've ever been out in one at 10 o'clock at night with all of the weird rustling and, you know, animals and stuff running around? It's really, it'll make you squeal a little bit. It's pretty crazy.
Step up and look at them.
But like I said, these are called cordon spur prunings, and so the spurs are pruned, and we leave 2 buds on each spur, and then each bud will turn into a cane, and it will push out, and we try to leave 2 fruit clusters per cane. Now what's interesting is at any point in the vineyard you're always managing 2 growing seasons. So if you look close, you can see next year's buds have already formed. So not only do we have this year's growing season that we're managing, but we've also got next year's buds that have already shown. And what's fascinating, I've seen pictures of this, if you take one of those buds and you slice it in half and look at it under a microscope, you can see every leaf and every grape berry microscopically is already formed in the bud. And so one of our greatest challenges that we have in Virginia viticulture is danger from late spring frosts. One of our good friends, Doug Fabioli, actually our wine consultant, you've probably seen him in the show, lost his entire crop last year over Mother's Day weekend. It hit 32 degrees and there was a frost, and so all of the shoots were about this long, and it just killed them off. It doesn't kill the vine, but the entire crop was gone. So the vines, by the time they recover, it's too late to get any usable crop. So it's just one of the perils of doing this. You'll notice that the entire vineyard itself is planted on 2 hills. One of the reasons that we do that is that the vines do not like cold air, and they do not like wet feet. So we want to make sure we've got good cold air drainage and good water drainage to make sure that the water and the cold air runs away from the vines. Because like I said, they are very sensitive. Another question we had is, when do you pick? A rough rule of thumb is that you pick the whites in mid-September and you pick the reds in mid-October. We can walk in a little bit and you'll see that the red grapes are still green, and they will stay green until about the first week of August. And then they will go through a very fascinating process called veraison, and that's where they actually start to get that deep purple color. And then we will go manually through the vineyard again and do what's called a green harvest. So if we look up down the rows and we see that probably 90% of the fruit has already turned purple, but some of them have still retained a green color, we'll cut all that off by hand. Because by the time you get to harvest, those particular clusters are not going to be as developed. So again, just another indication of how labor intensive and how much time we actually spend out here in the vineyard. I will say, having done this for quite a few years, vineyard operations are very much step 1 of the winemaking process. You are absolutely designing and dictating the style and the taste of your fruit depending on your trellis configuration, how many leaves you pull away, how many clusters per vine you leave. There's a lot of metrics in terms of, I mean, think about what is a vine. It's a photosynthesis engine to turn sunlight into sugar, right? So the more leaves you have per fruit is good to a point, but at some point the fruit can start to taste herbaceous, it can taste like bell pepper, it can taste grassy. So it's very careful management of the leaf surface area to the amount of fruit that you grow. And again, that's the vineyard manager, the winemaker, that walks through with the crews and dictates when and how much of the stuff has to happen. So I can see some heads nod and be like, that's not for me, but you can tell it really is, you know, very labor intensive. It's interesting to look at the structure of what we call the end brace. Like I said, You can see the big wire here. This is called the cordon wire. Now imagine, fast forward a couple of months to mid-September when you've got, maybe a ton of fruit hanging on this wire, and you get a big thunderstorm that blows through, shaking these vines around. You can imagine the pressure and the tension that is on these structures. What happens is this wire is attached to the end post, and then that's connected to the brace post, and you can see here, this is called the brace wire. So essentially this forms a tension compression truss, very much like bridge building. And we've got some engineers in the family. People can relate to some of the science of that. But what happens is as the tension starts to pull, this brace really takes the load. And then these catch wires, we have three levels of catch wire that really keep the what we call the canopy in place. Because when the vines start growing, they just grow out all over the place. Again, labor-intensive process. We go through by hand, and we actually tuck all the shoots up into the catch wires, one vine at a time, all day long. And when you turn around and look behind you, look down that row of vines, you can imagine you spend quite a bit of time out here getting it done. So in addition to myself, we've got a young man that works with us, Zach, but we also have crews of Latino guys. A lot of these guys work in a lot of the different vineyards, and it is very much, I can assure you, a skilled labor position. A lot of people are like, oh, why don't you go do a 7-Eleven drive-by? I'm like, absolutely not. I mean, a few bad decisions out in the vineyard can absolutely impact the quality of your fruit, the quality of your wine, the amount of yield you get. The guys aren't setting the vines up right. I mean, you can really kill, everything. So very much relying on the crew chief, and their skills and their experience in the vineyard. And also while they're out here, the guys are also scouting. I mean, you flip over your leaves and you're looking for leaf hoppers. You can see we had a little bit of Japanese beetle damage up here. We're looking for stink bugs. There's telltale signs on a leaf if it's got a magnesium deficiency, if it's got black rot, downy mildew, powdery mildew, phomopsis, botrytis. I mean, you name it. The list of stuff that can go wrong in the vineyard is daunting. But again, you just got to stay on top of it. It's like anything else. Diligence will keep you out of trouble. Once you start to get an outbreak of any kind of disease or whatever, then it gets really expensive to cure it. And again, you can risk your whole crop. So, any questions so far? Everybody looks kind of stunned.
With the Latinos you're talking about, how about talk about the differentiation?